And welcome in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour here on the game, presented by Firehouse Subs. Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell. Wes, good to be back. Tyler Head is taking a break from us. He's had enough of me from the last hour. Appreciate Jared Brown.
Fast.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, especially because I wasn't even here yesterday.
I know.
So I skipped out. Tyler's skipping out for a minute, but he will be back shortly to get us back on the tracks because I've already derailed us probably. Wes, don't know if you got to hear, but I got to talk to Jared Brown last hour, new Gamecock receiver who's been here since the spring, one of 3 new additions at receiver, and we had a good little conversation.
What do you have to say?
Well, we talked about a lot. We, of course, ended with food and gaming, as we typically do with a lot of the guys. But, good conversation with Jared. And, I mean, man, one of the things we talked about is just this receiver room. 2 new additions coming eventually in Vandrevius Jacobs and Delvon Campbell, the 2 guys who committed during this spring window. They'll be here, in time for the summer, preseason camp, all that good stuff. But, we got 3 new receivers in Columbia from the previous transfer portal window who were here for winter workouts and went through spring ball. And, Jared said, hey, we can all run, which I think we kind of knew, right? There's been a lot of conversation about, hey, the size, right? You don't have a lot of size in this room. Jared said they don't really hide from that, but a bunch of guys that can run. He actually said Amari Huggins-Bruce might be faster than him.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was on. I saw him leaving. He was on the phone. I wanted to say what's up to him, but that group, I think it is. It's been a big topic of discussion. Like, hey, they're not that big, but I kind of like that they're not shying away from it, and maybe are even using it as maybe a little chip on the shoulder, a little bit, like. But also, and we saw, South Carolina address that to an extent in the portal with Campbell. I think it's almost got to the point that it's been overblown. It's like once people realized this is a thing, they're like, wait a second, there aren't many big guys in this group anymore. It kind of took on a life of its own. And then you look, you really don't want a room of all 6'5" guys either, because it's just not – it's not natural for a 6'4", 6'5" guy to have the twitchiness that a smaller guy does. Even the 6'4", 6'5" guys that are just freaks, that are incredible athletes, a Nick Harbor, for example, they are most of the time a little bit more what you would call speed builders. And so – if you're going to have a diverse group, if you're going to have a receiver room that can get open and can create separation in man coverage, can create separation in short area bursts, I don't think you want 6'5" guys across the board.
I think even the teams that you could look at in college or even the pros and say, oh, look at, big freaky guy A, they typically have some smaller guys too, right? And so, and we've talked about this a lot. Look back at some of the South Carolina teams. There have been years where they didn't have a bunch of bigger guys. So maybe that you looked at it and it was kind of, you spread the wealth a little bit more. You didn't have one truly dominant receiver, but you had just a balanced team, a bunch of guys who could get it done. And really at the end of the day, at the receiver position, it's just about, can you get open? Can you run? Can you run good routes? Can you get open? Can you create separation? And so I think that's the biggest question. The coaching staff, I think, feels better about receivers, certainly than they did coming into spring. But obviously they wanted to add some more pieces to the portal. And I think there's really a couple reasons for that. Did they want to add more size to have more, I don't know, just a little bit more versatility, a little bit more of some different looks that they could present to the room? Yeah, I think so. But I think more than anything, it was about just continuing the competition level there too, right? Just adding more guys with proven ability. And so, yeah, one of those guys in Delvon Campbell ends up being 6'4". Great. That checks that box. But you look at the other guy they added, Vandrevius Jacobs, he's 6 foot tall. So he's not tiny, but he's not 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" either. At the end of the day, he just kind of fit the profile of what they wanted from a skill set standpoint.
So I've been sitting here trying to find it on Twitter. I did finally find what I was looking for. So this is we are Charles Power stands. And for those who aren't Recruitniks, Charles is basically the lead rankings guy on 3. Used to work with 24/7 Sports. Has just been in the game for a long time. Fully willing to sort of step out on a branch and sort of rank a guy higher than the rest of the industry at any given point. I think Charles probably did a cartwheel when he saw the Lenora Sellers I'm calling it quote news yesterday. I don't know if it was like news, but it was news, but expected news. We'll talk about that later in the show, I'm sure. But so Charles, for those who don't know, is I don't know if I've ever seen anybody take a more analytical approach to rankings and trying to take what is very much an art and put as much data and science into it as possible. And so what he's been doing now that obviously the 2024 class is signed, they've got their initial 2026 rankings are out. They did their 2025 update. I believe this is an opportunity for those guys to kind of look back a little bit, especially with the NFL draft just taking place. And so what Charles did was he's been taking the last 100 position who were drafted in the first 3 rounds of the draft, obviously, and then looked back at the average among that group as far as when they were in high school, right? And so, I mean, if you want to follow him on Twitter, X, at Charles Power, fascinating stuff, right down to their stats in high school, their measurables, their track times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, have you seen this? Are you looking at it already?
I'm not looking at it.
What do you think the average height of a wide receiver drafted in the first 3 rounds?
First 3 rounds
is? So the last 100 receivers that were drafted as top 3 round guys.
6 foot.
Pretty much. Basically, 6 foot and 0.6 of it. So basically 6 foot and a half tall, 183 and a half pounds.
Yeah.
So it gets even crazier. Out of those 100, only 10 under 5'10". So you do want to be, now we're talking first 3 rounds. That's pretty elite, but still, you do want to be 5'10" or taller. But would you believe just 2 over 6'4"?
You know, I would. I would believe that.
You really want to be about 5'10" and a half to 6'3" and a half, ideally.
Well,
and
but
not
how many are, 6'2"? Do you have that?
I don't.
Okay. That would be interesting too. It seems like the point is more guys are towards that 6 foot range than 6'2". Because only 2 6'3" guys out of 100.
No, only 2 over 6'4".
2 over 6'4". Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and there are outliers within that group, I'm sure. And I'm sure if you looked at it on a curve, most of them would sort of plot back towards that 6 foot to 6'1" range.
That's right.
Is what that tells us. And it's not an exact science, but it is, I think, fascinating because I would have thought there maybe would have been a few more guys that were drafted. Hey, because how often do I'll put myself in this category, fans of the game, media people, whatever, how often are we like, oh, man, this guy's 6'5" and can run? Sign me up.
Oh, yeah, you love it.
But this data shows us that doesn't always translate to success at that position. Really, it's probably more like, give me the guy that can move and get open and catch the football. And then is some height, if he already has that skill, that other skill I just mentioned, is a height an added advantage? Yes, but it gets to a certain point where it's maybe not an advantage because there are so few guys just the physics of it. If you are a bigger guy, longer legs, it's hard to make those little quick movements that are required to get open in short space, I think.
Yeah, it is it's a fascinating thing to think about. And I do think we get a little bit too, like the NFL Combine is very valuable, right? But sometimes we get a little bit too caught up. I mean, there's the underwear Olympics, we get a little bit too caught up in it. And you remember we were talking about this around the time the portal window was still open, South Carolina's recruiting receivers. And we were kind of getting scouting reports from what we were hearing on some of the guys that they were recruiting. And often the refrain would be, he can run and catch, Great. That's a great scouting. That's exactly what you want in a receiver. And at the end of the day, I think that's looking back at some people were maybe surprised. Look at Van Drevius Jacobs as an example. Like, oh, well, I thought they were looking for 6'2" or above, ideally. But you found a guy who you think can run and catch. And so go back and look. Let's expand on your point here. So the top receivers in the NFL last year in terms of reception, CeeDee Lamb had 135. He led the NFL. He's 6'2". He's not a giant. Tyreek Hill was next. He's not a giant. I mean, that is a small, he's 5'10". Amon-Ra St. Brown, who Jared Brown said he's been studying lately, is 6 foot. He's kind of Jared Brown's physical profile. And Mike Furrey, former Detroit Lion, turned on Jared Brown to studying Amon-Ra St. Brown more. Then you have Evan Ingram, who's a tight end. Michael Pittman and Keenan Allen are 6'2", and Stephon Diggs is 6 foot. Those are kind of your next guys up. So there's a kind of a range in there, but the point is the top 10 isn't, 6'4" or above all of them.
Yeah, you got it. I don't know, maybe I'm leaning too far into this, but I feel like to be that elite receiver and also be 6'5", you got to be like Calvin Johnson or something, which those guys don't come up. They don't come around very often. A couple of other little interesting things from Charles here. 82 out of the 100 played multiple sports. So, kids, let me be an old man for a second. Don't specialize too early if you think you have a college future. Like, almost all the guys that make it to the NFL are playing multiple sports. Like that's just, I feel like, a fact. And this may sound like a no-brainer. 90 out of these 100 guys played wide receiver in high school. So you might say, well, duh, but then think about how many guys get moved, like that whole, this guy played that spot, but he's going to move to wide receiver. How often would we see a quarterback, they're going to try him at wide receiver? Well, your odds are actually, like the advantage of having actually had to have learned how to get open in high school and run routes and leverage and all those things that go along with that are incredibly important. So out of the 100, 6 played quarterback, 4 played running back. The other 90 played wide receiver in high school.
At that level, you're looking for a craftsman. Like, there aren't any guys that get drafted into the NFL where you go, that guy's slow. Like, there's a baseline of athleticism and athletic traits, but the body types can be a lot different. At the end of the day, it is about being able to get open. I mean, we were looking back. Jared had not seen Mike Furrey's highlights from the NFL, so I told him, you need to go back and look. He didn't know that Mike had caught 98 balls in a season. I think that was in 2006. Mike Furrey, I think by his own admission, was not the biggest nor the fastest guy in the NFL, but he knew how to get open and catch the football. And if you can combine those traits, knowing how to play receiver with the athletic traits, then you're going to be really, really good.
No doubt. Should we come back on the other side and talk about
on the other side because Tyler's
LaNorris Sellers?
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about LaNorris Sellers, I think. We're going to go to break, bring Tyler back in. You're listening to Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrod Westminster, Chris Clark along with you here on this Tuesday morning. I want to let you know, starting tomorrow, we're going to be giving away some tickets to go see Aja Wilson and the defending champion Las Vegas Aces take on the Puerto Rican national team this Saturday at Colonial Life Arena. So make sure you're tuned into the game all day long tomorrow for your chance to win those tickets. Guys, we have some news coming away from last night. Another welcome home event for Coach Beamer. And right off the jump, he was asked the question that has been asked how many times this spring, I think, through every media availability on if we have a starting quarterback or not. He finally answered it in a way last night. Let's hear what Coach Beamer had to say.
I mean, I'll tell you guys what I told Lenoris and all the quarterbacks coming out of spring practice. Coming out of spring practice, Lenoris is our starting quarterback. But just like all of our positions, that we will continue to compete at all positions. So I told Robbie Ashford the moment I say that at a Gamecock Club event, the headline's going to be Beamer names Lenoris Sellers starting quarterback. Lenoris is the starting quarterback coming out of spring. And now, like I told Lenoris and like I told Robbie did a great job during spring practice along with our other quarterbacks. Lenoris did a great job, and I expect Lenoris to continue to compete and continue to earn that position as well. You guys know from being here, I mean, going into 2022, nobody thought that Nicky Mamori and DQ Smith were going to be starting safeties because we had two seniors that they were behind, and we got into week 2 and they became starters, so it's the same thing. We don't all of a sudden name someone, Debo Williams, as our starting linebacker coming out of spring practice, but he needs to have a great summer to continue to be the starting linebacker. So that's where we are. And I had those conversations with those guys the Monday after the spring game.
And he was right. The headlines do read that, Shane Beamer has named a starting quarterback, but at the same time, it's also not surprising. We kind of assumed this from everything that you guys saw through spring practice, what we saw in the spring game. There was nothing that indicated that it was not Lenoris Sellers' job, but now it's the first time we're officially hearing it from Beamer's mouth.
Yeah, and we actually, instead of saying Lenoris Sellers starting quarterback, we put Lenoris Sellers starting quarterback coming out of spring practice.
So you guys had that headline. Everywhere else, it's like Lenoris Sellers starting quarterback.
Wes is responsible.
Yeah, the more national perspective.
Well, and I mean, are we at the? We're just talking about phrasing at this point, right? Like semantics, kind of in a way.
Yeah, I mean, look,
he is the starting quarterback until he's not. Yeah. That's the case for any starting quarterback.
That's right. I mean, it's semantics. I mean, if you're Beamer, and it's different than like the Spencer Rattler situation. I was trying to go back and research that today. So somebody give me, when was Rattler was never really named the starter, right? Like officially. Like he just came in. I do remember there was a very short window where Beamer was talking about, hey, the quarterback competition, right? Like here's the guys we got coming in. But very quickly, it was just like, I mean, yeah, like Spencer's the guy.
It didn't need to be said.
It wasn't announced.
Yeah, it wasn't announced.
And it wasn't, but it also wasn't, we're going to keep it going, right? Yeah. We're going to see what else happens. This is a little bit more of, Lenoris is a starter right now. We're going to keep the competition going. And so because he's saying that, I think he's phrasing it as coming out of the spring. In reality, is it more strong than that? I think so.
Well, he took, when we went into the spring, it was, if you want to talk about the phrasing,
yeah,
Lenoris is going to take the first snap.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which is a little bit, if you're talking about semantics, it's a little bit different than saying he's starting quarterback. Just the phrase starting quarterback carries weight. It does.
Sure.
And so, yeah, you have to kind of, if you want to be completely accurate, you have to tack on the coming out of spring practice part, sure, right? But just in the history of football, the phrase starting quarterback has carried quite a bit of weight. But I think even saying he's taking the first rep was different than saying he's QB1, because other quarterbacks got reps with the first team. Mm-hmm. But then I think you take, okay, he took the first rep of spring practice. Then he was offensive MVP in the spring. And he was obviously one of the two starters among the two teams in the spring game. and now Beamer saying starting quarterback coming out of spring practice. It essentially means as long as he doesn't, which there's no reason to think he would, as long as he doesn't just say, I'm going to take the summer off and I've arrived, then
But you won't.
it's trending heavily, which we thought it was. Here's what I do appreciate, though. I appreciate the that Beamer was just genuine about this. Like, you know how some coaches will extend something out when it's like kind of obvious to everyone, and they'll try to convince us that we're just blind or something. And I appreciate seriously, like
You're
coaches
right,
will
you're right.
like for him to just say, look, guys, I'm not gonna treat y'all like you're stupid. Like this is where things are right now. And I think honestly for them to just be that honest with Ashford as well, is a good thing and speaks to the staff being genuine, because it would have been easy to just extend it because you brought in a portal quarterback to compete. Like letting both guys kind of know where they are and having those conversations privately, but then letting the fan he even let this marinate a little bit first rather than say this at the Columbia Gamecock Club thing when he had just been talking to the guys. Mm-hmm. And so I think they've handled this well all the way around by saying, look, this is a true open competition going into the spring, but then we're not going to pretend that Sellers hasn't had a great spring.
Sure.
But has Ashford made steps forward? Yeah, he definitely has. Like, we've heard that as well. So I think the bigger takeaway, too, is that I think they should feel pretty good about that QB room, maybe compared to where it was going into the offseason.
Well, and for a guy like Ashford, who has been very honest about it, we certainly appreciate that he didn't get the development he wanted when he was at Auburn, and he came here to get that development. Now, can all that be accomplished in a month of spring ball? Probably not. So he's still got strides to make, and not to say that he can't make leaps and bounds through the summer or fall camp and push for that job when the fall rolls around, but he's clearly not at that point right now. And again, that's kind of what we assumed, but now we hear that officially from Beamer, and that's going to be the standard until somebody says otherwise.
Yeah, just thoroughly, unsurprising that this is the direction it's gone. And I think this is our question, though, was, this is what we all expect to happen, not just based on even what we've seen or just speculating, but even just what you hear, what you hear around the program, the amount of first-team reps that Sellers did get. Did others get some to open spring and throughout spring? Yes. But just all the signs pointed to this being the case. But I think the question was, when does Beamer actually address this and kind of let us know the status? And then how far does he go with that? I'm not surprised at all that he's elected to say, hey, Sellers is the guy coming out of spring, but we're going to continue to get a good look at Robbie, et cetera, et cetera. Not surprised that that's the case. That said, I think it's going to be very tough for not just Robbie Ashford, but anybody, on this team to unseat LaNorris Sellers, whether it's in, the summer, the preseason, or even once we get into the actual meat of the football schedule.
The Elon AI article creator on the right side of my Twitter feed,
Grok?
It didn't get the memo that it's just outside of spring or just exiting spring. Taps Sellers as Gamecocks QB1 for 2024.
And that's why they'll never replace you guys.
I hope not.
We're thankful.
I hope not.
They are getting better.
Yes,
Not there yet.
are.
Not there yet.
The AI machines are improving with
Every day.
swiftness.
We'll keep this conversation going. Look at some of the pros and cons, so to speak, of naming a starting quarterback coming out of spring in the month of May. We'll hit that next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Nobody's hitting the grand slam this year.
Bro, how? Sorry.
Already looking ahead to the 2024 football season, and plenty of action still going on, whether you're watching some basketball playoffs, whether you're watching some South Carolina baseball, or even looking forward to the season. Something that I'm already thinking about is in my home, what am I going to do to upgrade my audiovisual setup? I've got some ideas, and so do the guys over at Integrated Media. Our friends Michael and Nathan, they've been to my home. They've been to Wes Mitchell's home. They can come out to your home or business as well and create that man cave that you've always wanted. They can get you a great outdoor patio or screen porch setup, or just your living room and your TV or your bedroom, your TV in your living room and or your bedroom. They can outfit that for you, hide all those ugly wires. They can source the equipment for you. They can mount your TV. They can even put in a complete smart home system where you can control all those devices, your lights and your thermostat from the touch of a button. Check them out at 803-948-8327 or integratedmediainc.com.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Tuesday. Early game tomorrow morning. Going to be broadcasting at the CEOA breakfast at the Hilton Garden Inn tomorrow morning from 6 until 9. So check that out with Bill and Preston and Jen again coming up tomorrow morning. Jump back in this conversation about Lenora Sellers being named the starter coming away from spring. I think it was Dow Loggins a couple weeks back that when being posed this question for the millionth time, as they all were over the course of spring, talked about the pros and cons of naming a starting quarterback prior to the season. And one of the pros was obviously the guys in the locker room kind of know who that leader is going to be. But at the same time, he said the guys in the locker room are going to know before everybody else knows. Before a coach says anything about it, everybody in the locker room can assume who that starter is going to be and who that leader is going to be. And for everything that we've seen through spring practice, through the spring game, it already kind of seemed like they were treating Lenore Sellers as that leader, as that starter, well before Beamer said anything last night.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you go into the summer, and right now is kind of obviously a little bit of a break. It's the one break these guys actually truly get before you start getting back into the season, and it's just complete, everything's hectic from this point forward after May. And the regular season might as well start in June for these guys. So I think for them, once you get into that June session and you're doing there's more on-field work in the summer than there ever was before, and you also have player-run practices, which the coaching staff can't be out there for, but the guys will look for one sort of leader to run those. And so I think having just a pecking order, again, not even necessarily, does it mean 100% you're saying, hey, this guy is starting game one this season? Beamer was clear that's really not quite to the extent of what he's saying, but going into the offseason, going into the summer, Lenore Sellers is your QB1, and so he's going to run the player-run practices on offense, I would imagine. It gives the guys somebody to look up to, and I think in a way there's part of this that I think is also important. You have a young quarterback, and he's been he's an excellent lead by example guy. But we talked about last season how they were empowering Spencer Rattler by giving him say-so in the offense and giving him this sort of collaborative effort with he and Dow Loggins about what this offense was going to be. This isn't quite that yet, but I think with your young quarterback, you want to empower him to stand up and lead. You want to empower him to be a voice, and you want to empower him to not wonder, am I the guy or not within this group? So there are advantages to going ahead and naming a starter, and a lot of it, to me, has to do with the guys looking up to the right player, and then that player realizes, hey, they're looking at me. I better figure out something to say.
Yeah, because Sellers is a guy that is a little bit more quiet. He's not as verbally, demonstrative as maybe some other guys. More of a lead by example. Now, he will get fired up. You think about his high school days. Go back and look. He's normally just out there doing his thing, making plays. But he'll show emotion. He'll lead. But I go back to what you said in the last segment, Wes, as for me, and this is just my opinion, I think the best reason to do this is just to let the guys know who are in the battle where things stand. Being able to be honest with your players and have that open line of communication to where they're not reading things on the internet that they don't know. Or if a coach announces something and a player, there are real instances of these things. The player, I didn't know that. Coach said it in a press conference. Being able to have some time elapse between the end of spring practice and right now, even had some media opportunities, some speaking engagements, to where he's kind of let this, the word you use, Wes, marinate. You just kind of let it lie, let it rest for a little bit, and then come out and just be honest about where things stand. I think, these days there's so much talk about the culture in a locker room, being able to have control of a locker room in college with things so kind of fragmented all over the place. At the end of the day, just being able to have an honest conversation about where things stand with your guys, I think is very valuable. And with a position like quarterback, people want to know. That's the number one question you're always going to get. When you've got a perceived quarterback battle, you're going to get asked every single press conference or media opportunity, where do things stand? And so at some point you have to come with an answer. And so I think the way it's handled was pretty good. But that, for me, is the number one reason why you go ahead and do it now, is just let the guys know where it stands.
Is there any really cons to it doing this, at least to this degree at this point in time? I think it was Loggins that brought up, okay, well, now your opponents know who to prepare for, but it's not like there's a ton of tape out there on Sellers, and you're not prepping for South Carolina in the middle of May at this point anyway. So I feel like that's kind of null when it comes to this situation as it is.
Yeah, and unless you were going to do that thing coaches do where they just go into the first game and don't announce a starter until game, you know what I'm saying, or they just run a first guy out there. I mean, was South Carolina ever really going to take it to that extent? I would say probably not. So they're going to know who to prepare for, I think, for the most part. And so I don't really know if that's a huge factor in this one. To me, really, it would have gone back to just wanting to continue to push both guys, I think. Or I think if it was that close, like if it was truly just kind of nip and tuck, like if it was that close, up and down, one guy's better one day, one guy's better the next, then you'd say, look, this thing is not decided. Let's let this thing extend out. But with the way things have played out, I go back to what Loggins said. The guys know. The guys in that locker room know. So if the guys already know, if it's kind of obvious, which, again, we're not there at every practice, but why not sort of just confirm that to the other players as well? Like, yeah, what you're seeing, we're seeing the same thing, I think.
Yeah, you're not hiding from it. And again, I think that part of it kind of goes back to just having unity in the locker room. And at some point in sports, somebody's starting the game, and then other people are playing, and some people are not playing at all or playing a few snaps. When they go on road trips, the coaches have to sit down and say, here's who is traveling, Now, that doesn't really apply here because from everything we've seen and heard, Robbie Ashford is probably going to be the backup quarterback. I think that seems to be where it's trending, and so there'll be some opportunities maybe for him to play. There'll be some opportunities for him. Obviously, he's going to be a guy that if he's the backup quarterback, he's traveling. But guys see those things. They can tell in practice, here's how many reps a guy is getting. And so much media now, so much access to information that your message in public, if you're a coach, has to match, what you're telling your team. And so, obviously, those conversations individually have been had with Sellers and Robbie Ashford and, heck, Davis Bevel, all the other guys involved in this thing. And now you have some clarity. I think you have clarity for those guys that are involved, for the team, for us as media, and for the fan base as well.
Come back and hear a little bit more of what Coach Beamer had to say at the Welcome Home event out in Florence last night to wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you for a couple more minutes here. Let's hear a little bit more of what Coach Beamer had to say last night at the Florence Welcome Home event. Of course, the transfer portal window closed the other day, but there's still the opportunity for South Carolina to get more talent out of it. Wes and I talked a little bit about a couple of the offensive linemen that are still on the radar for South Carolina, potentially sign to fill what we think is the final scholarship spot for the 2024 season. Here is cut number 8, Dave, is Coach Beamer talking about addressing needs in the portal this offseason.
I feel good. Coming out of spring practice, I think I talked about it publicly. There were some positions that depth-wise we weren't where we wanted to be just from a scholarship number standpoint. Offensive line was one of them. Not saying that we were not good on the offensive line, but just to be able to practice, having a certain number of guys on scholarship, we weren't there from a lineman standpoint. At receiver, we had some areas to address as well, and that was what we went into the portal. Those two positions were essentially primary needs and our primary, portal targets for us. I feel like we've addressed it well. We're still not done. Obviously, the portal's closed, but if you're in the portal, you can still take visits as well. So that's still going on with us and other colleges as well. So we'll see how it finishes in the end, but I like where we are right now and like where we're headed also.
And again, if nothing else, you maybe add one more body to the offensive line room, but regardless if that happens or not, South Carolina has done a great job addressing all of its needs and all of its positions through the portal so far. We were here with Jared Brown the last hour. Obviously, that room has been completely revamped, including adding a couple, just in the last week. I think, you kind of look and say that South Carolina's checked all of its boxes this offseason and what it needed to get out of the portal.
Yeah, and I think that was a big trend that we talked about in the initial transfer portal opening of this offseason. It's a little bit more quiet. I think teams have learned that if you're still feeling like your primary needs during this second window, that you're living dangerously, I feel like. So I think you take what you have in the spring, use that as another evaluation piece, and then you say, in a perfect world, where else would we like to add? And if you're not talking about kind of luxury ads, that can be scary. And so, I think for South Carolina, we know they hit the portal hard at receiver. The initial opening, they've hit it actually pretty hard this second time around as well. They get 2 guys there. Beamer was not quite sure if the paperwork was in for him to be able to talk about those guys yet, but obviously sounds pleased with the sort of progression there. And then, they've been trying to add another offensive lineman. Chris, I've said that I still think the starting 5 is probably among the group that's already on this roster. We'll see if something pops up. One of those guys Tyler and I were talking about yesterday has committed to Washington, so he's off the board. And then Stephen Hubbard wrapped up his OV. We'll see what happens there. But I do think maybe luxury is a little bit too strong, but I kind of think they'd like to add another offensive lineman, but I don't know that it's a absolute need at this point.
Yeah, there's a difference, kind of threading that needle of trying to figure out how to classify. You come into this transfer portal window, the spring one, if you're South Carolina, and I do think you could say that receiver was still a need, but it wasn't like, okay, if we're in big trouble if we don't get 1 or 2, or we have zero clue who the starters could even be. If you were going into the transfer portal window saying, hey, our team has to sign a starting quarterback out of the spring portal window, that's not a good place to be in. They did want to increase the competition and add some different traits and characteristics from the receiver room. If they had struck out, would that have been disappointing? Yes. Would it have been 100% integral to the potential success of this team? I don't know if you could quite go there. I think it was important that they added another receiver or 2 this window, and so they're able to do that, which was a positive. I think on the offensive line, again, we've talked about this. The numbers there, just from a numbers standpoint, is not quite where you want it to be. Just with some of the defections where you're at, you have kind of a mix of some transfers, some very young guys, and some upperclassmen. you'd like to add another guy there just for depth purposes. Not even necessarily we've got to find a starting position X along the line, but more competition and more depth.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when here soon, fans will be able to start to look at this roster and actually feel like it is finalized. Much like we talked about with basketball, how all the scholarships are accounted for, the portal is closed in terms of guys leaving you. You truly can start to look ahead here soon to this season in terms of this is what the team is and what can South Carolina get out of this group in terms of wins and losses.
Yeah, and now it's, again, they're kind of off for this month, but as you get into the summer workouts and obviously fall camp, it's kind of figuring out what the rest of that depth chart looks like. We know quarterback now, but figuring out starting five, how are you going to split up the reps at wide receiver? We have a good idea of how running back is going to go, but even, after Rocket Sanders, what does that look like? Is it Oscar Attaway, or how does that all split up? So a lot of questions still to be answered about this team, and again, plenty of time to answer those questions, but we're certainly not in the position where you go with like running back, where it's like, oh, we don't have enough guys in this room. Can they get somebody out of the portal to fill this desperate need that they have coming out of the spring?
Yeah, somebody actually asked me the other day on Gamecock Central, what's the most improved position group for South Carolina going into this year on paper? And my answer was actually edge, because that's the first thing that popped in my head. But it may actually prove to be the running back spot when you just look at, on paper, the number of guys they've added there that have genuine experience at the highest level. You add in some depth as well with some younger guys. You bring in Matt Fuller here soon. To me, it's probably one of those two positions, but certainly you feel pretty good about running back at this point.
Absolutely. So we'll keep an eye on what happens in the portal with South Carolina as they wrap up their portal recruiting for the 2024 offseason. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself and Terry Ford up next here on the game.
All right, guys, before we get out of here, let me tell you about one more of our great sponsors. That's our friends at Classic Roofing. Head on over to classicroofingsc.com today or give them a call, 803-590-7870. Of course, if you own your home, you got to take care of your roof. It is one of the most important parts of your entire house. Taking care of your roof, it can be challenging, but you do not have to do it alone. The years of expertise that they have at Classic Roofing, they're going to make this simple for you. Quality craftsmanship, great customer service that is simply unmatched. You're going to feel total confidence in your decision to hire Classic Roofing, just like I did. Tell you what, go right now, classicroofingsc.com. Click the free estimate button if you want some peace of mind about the future of your roof. Set it up so they can come out to your home. They can give you a complete estimate on maybe what your roof's future looks like. Are there any repairs you need to do? Do it right now, classicroofingsc.com.